Howdy everybody, so my name is Kawena Jones and I am running for candidate for the Newcastle Ward in the Waikato District. And so I hail, born and bred from a small place called Whatawhata. I still live there. I am the co-founder of Koorero New Zealand, which is a social enterprise that focuses on driving cultural sustainability and best practice employment models. I sit on a number of different boards in Hamilton, primarily in the youth development sector.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just resigned as of last Wednesday.
Scary.
Yeah.
It's all going now.
It's scary but exciting.
Yeah.
And some might say that it's probably a little bit, it's a courageous step, and some may say that I'm a bit of a fool for doing it. But hey, look.
I think both is true.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to be getting into politics and exposing yourself up to public scrutiny, and it's uncomfortable. But obviously we both believe in our causes, and it should be worth all the uncomfortable, and hopefully we can make some good change for people we would hope to represent.
Yeah, well that's right.
Yeah, and so my name's Tim Young. I have done a Masters of Science in Psychology, and I've got experience in educational psychology. I didn't become an educational psychologist because it's a bit tough to do all the travel, so I decided to develop an educational video game called Rocket Island, which is now being introduced into schools. So that's most of my experience, and so we've got quite a lot in common about wanting to empowering our youth through education, and just how important that is. It's with all the systemic changes that go on. That's the best way to target our young people and to create long-lasting change rather than kind of band-aid solutions.
Yeah, I agree. And look, so just touching on a little bit more of my background. So I had primarily worked in the public sector, particularly in the iwi space, and have been really fortunate to have led and managed the employment portfolio. And so for me, I'm particularly passionate about education and employment. But in this sense, I think it really is about the education of knowing why it's actually important to vote, and actually and understanding the role of council, understanding the role of what a councillor does, and then certainly understanding what it means for community members, for residents, for ratepayers, and how does that translate. And so when we focus more around education, for me it's actually educating people around that, the reasons why it's actually important to vote. And history tells us, actually particularly in the Waikato District, that not many people get out and vote. If anything, we had one of the worst voting turnouts in the country. So it tells me that there's a lot to be done in that space.
Absolutely, and like when you talk about disenfranchisement of different groups, it's generally the lack of participation in politics, isn't it? If they and almost all of that lack of participation comes from lack of knowledge around why it's important, how it affects them, change you can make, and how it affects their everyday life. Because I think when people realise that exactly all the decisions that are made for them and how it affects them, they're much more likely to vote.
Yeah, that's right.
That's going to be the challenge. And
I agree, and I'll be really interested to see, actually, because I see Waikato, I don't know if you remember, but they recently they did a poll or survey.
Oh, right.
So I'm really keen to hear the feedback around that, and it was more so, I think they surveyed some key questions around, what do you know about local government, do you know who your current council is, and I think some of the findings or some of the feedback that we'll get from that will help us to understand some of those the reasons why. That's
really interesting, actually, because it's not just education from the constituents' point, which is super important because it's a people-up movement, and more people, if you have that grassroots movement, you're going to have change. But at the same time, it's actually the council's being better educated by having more data to work from.
Yeah, that's right.
And like it's so good to see Waikato doing that, because we have no idea about where to engage, who to engage with, and from a disabled person perspective as well, a big part of the council not making the right decisions or not making any decisions at all is because they don't have data around where disabled people are participating in society, where they're not, and why they're not participating where they're not. And so if they have more information, and same with businesses, they can make better informed decisions.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd say the same, because I mean, you'd probably understand that actually for us, even though that we had quite a low turnout, the turnout even for Māori is usually always worse off.
Yes.
And so it'd be really good to kind of understand that. But look, some of the conversations that I've had on my door knocks and kind of getting out in the community, certainly some of those, the Koorero and the conversations that are coming up is that they don't get involved because they don't care to know or know to care.
Yes.
And for them it has also been about actually the people who have stood and a representation of the communities that they're serving. So, but now the really exciting part is that you're seeing a massive surge of young people, i.e. us.
Yes.
And then a diverse range of people in the community, from our Asian community, from our Māori Pacifica community. Like, I don't know, for some reason I'm just seeing more people kind of taking the step.
I think it has to do with those negative feedback loops that kind of drive disenfranchisement are the same positive feedback loops the other way, like where these things kind of self-perpetuate. So like, negative feedback loops, when you don't see someone who represents you or looks like you can't see yourself in that position. You're not being represented, so then it gets worse and worse because they're getting further behind. You just never. It's hard to catch up once you start behind. So I guess that's working in our favour now that lots of people can see other young people from different races and ability levels doing it. Then they can see themselves in it, and maybe that's why we're seeing a surge in young people standing and hopefully voting.
Well, that's right. And luckily, I think you've touched a good part there. So it's very rare people getting up and standing, but it drives home the message now about people really getting out and voting. Well, the first one is making sure that you've been registered to vote. So
that's important.
And
when
and
you go enroll.vote.nz or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what's quite interesting, what's quite unique in my ward in particular, is that because for the last 12 or so years, my incumbent has gone unopposed majority of the time. A lot of, because we just had a launch over on Saturday, and a lot of the conversations that came out of that was, oh gosh, well, I don't think we've ever had to vote before, just simply because no one else has ever stood. And so there's this whole now re-educating our community around what that process looks like.
That's our point about education and why it's so important, and why what Seed Waikato is doing is so good, because
that's right.
Once you get them young, then they know for the rest of their life why it's important. And otherwise, if it's been 20 years since you've been allowed to vote, but you haven't seen any reason, it'll be harder to get to see the utility and go forward. So
that's right. And I think, I would think too, with this new event coming up, I think it's let's give a shit about politics. That's really going to provide the platform
and hype.
And hype. Which is really exciting, and I'm really excited to meet some of the other candidates. The ones who I haven't met today.
Yes, I haven't. I've met most of them now, but I'm looking forward to meeting a couple more.
Well, that's right.
So, should we talk a little bit about climate change? And
Yeah, cool. So what's your view on climate change? Yeah.
So my view is that so I think I'm the most scientifically literate out of any of the Hamilton City Council
I
candidates.
probably would agree with you, to be honest. Yeah.
Even the younger candidates who are much more scientifically literate than the older candidates. I think I'm the only one with like a master's in science.
Yeah.
So I feel like compared to the general public, I'm able to look at studies and differentiate. But because I'm not a climate scientist, I take my views from the experts who are climate scientists.
Yeah.
And if you look at the meta-analyses who take 12,000 studies from climate scientists only, not other scientists who don't know about climate science, it's just the most overwhelming majority. So there's just no argument, in my opinion. It's just how we deal with it now. There's just no point even arguing about whether or not men or humans are influencing climate change.
Yeah, and look, I think some of the rhetoric, if that's the word that you use, is around actually, it's we're at a climate emergency, or and when people talk about emergency, how do you define that? What does that look like?
I think it's interesting with the word emergency.
Yeah.
And I think Phil Goff or someone up north kind of said they had a shift in thinking about it because usually you think, there's like my house is on fire, like that's an emergency.
Yes.
And so you need to deal with things like immediately.
Yeah.
So I kind of think of it as how fast you need to react rather than the fact my house isn't, I think climate change is an emergency, even though my house isn't on fire now, or we're not having a heat wave right now, or we don't have these extreme cyclone coming through the country right now. If we don't act right now, these things will continue. We will have more like literal emergencies if we don't treat it as an emergency.
Yeah, and so I was fortunate enough to have been invited to it was a conference. It was led actually by Waikato Tainui, where I had the opportunity to actually speak about me standing as a candidate for council. But at the time that I went along to that, had the opportunity to listen to an amazing speaker, and actually she's my auntie. So Taruki Thompson, she's actually she sits out on the west coast of Raglan, but she really gave a practical sense and evidence of the impacts of climate change and how that's impacted on us as Māori and the land. And so she was really able to give some clear evidence around that, from finding, kind of dead carcasses of whales through to birds, and just them being infested with plastic, and and so there's that, and then also just erosion of the banks, and how close it's coming, to how close it's coming up their land. And so it's like, so for us, I think from a practical sense, because look, I'm the other spectrum of you. I don't have a science degree. Yeah. And I certainly don't profess to be an expert in that space, and probably still would ideally like to do some due diligence in that space more. But I've certainly seen enough to know that actually there needs to be some changes.
Yeah, and you can be for a lot of the changes. You could be for planting trees and doing things that would help climate change, even if you didn't believe climate scientists for some reason. Yeah. Like for instance, if you want to reduce erosion, planting trees is a good idea anyway, and then that stores carbon. And if you want I don't know. There's heaps of different things, but I was going to say before, one of the main contentions around the climate change emergency debate going on, in my opinion, from when I've talked to people who aren't for declaring an emergency, it's all about if there's a plan in place already.
Yes. Yeah.
So even though I think Andrew King might not be for declaring a climate emergency, but he does believe in climate change.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's around the plan being implemented, and I think it's a tricky chicken egg situation going on at the moment, because I think if there was a plan in place, would be more likely to declare a climate emergency, but would be more likely to declare I would be more likely to make a plan if there was a climate emergency declared.
Yeah.
So I think it would be better to only declare the emergency after a plan has been made. But because everyone's dragging their feet on making a plan, I think that we need to declare an emergency to force that action, and then be like, oh, well, what are we doing about it? We actually need to do something about it now that we've declared an emergency. Yeah. And I think it would just add a bit more pressure.
Yeah, and I mean, in an ideal world for me, I'd like to see probably a little bit more action from the government itself. I mean, look, there's a part of it in local government that we play in that. But it'll be great also to kind of see more of a push at that end.
Yeah, but I think from the local government thing, it's more about showing leadership rather than like the change.
Driving it,
the change that needs to be made needs to be from central government.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, but for local government, just switching to solar power is a great financial saving anyway. You know, solar panels pay themselves back within 7 years, and they have returns of over 300% over their lifetime.
Right.
So that's just, for me, that seems like a given as a good place to start, and then we can create incentives, and we can work with businesses to reduce plastic supply, non-biodegradable plastics and things like that. So I think it's more, we can't make the impact that needs to be made to stop the planet from warming by over 1.5 degrees Celsius, which would include cutting emissions by 50% over the next 12 years.
Yeah.
But I think we really need to just be showing that leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And so what are your thoughts, given that obviously the Waikato is very, and I don't know if I'm skipping the gun a little bit, but let's just go there anyway. But the Waikato being you know, key drivers in the agri kind of dairy sector. I mean, when you look at the Waikato, actually in general, when you look at New Zealand, a lot of it's been built on the dairy industry, and contrary to that, also is that the offset of it is that we're, you know, the dairy industry contributes to, or are a big contributor of carbon emissions.
Absolutely.
And so how do we, I know that, I mean, locally there are a number of different organisations that are really pushing this agenda. I think it's Biodiversity of Waikato, I think that's the name of the organisation. You know, and there are other different pockets. Yes.
And even the agriculture industry itself, I think that's Farming Matters now, which is like an education website that shows, is providing education from farmers for farmers about ways to reduce emissions and runoff from other pollutants. So yeah, I think it's obviously one of the biggest challenges we have as a country. Oh yeah. Because we've got tourism, agriculture and technology as our three biggest industries, and our clean green image really helps our tourism one, but then it's going to take a bit of change from the agriculture industry. Right. But then the third one, technology, that is a huge industry and our fastest growing, is going to help solve that. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things. And so ag tech is just going to be huge, and it's going to help reduce emissions while increasing productivity. But like you said, all these organisations, including from within the agriculture industry, it's just going to be education, because that's right. It doesn't have to, it is the more cows is more methane thing. There's been a bit of an argument, and while that is true, there's just so much change that could be done around fencing off. So you're not getting that runoff into the river, and there's just lots of ways to reduce pollutants and carbon emissions without necessarily having a huge impact on productivity. And then the technology can pick up that extra productivity and improve profits as well.
Yeah, yeah. And well, because the difference between me and you is that obviously, so you're standing for council in the East Ward.
Yes,
you probably have next to zero farms, or I don't know, maybe.
We didn't.
Yeah, do you have any farms on the east?
No, it cuts off right on Boddington Road, so across the road are the farms.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
See, whereas when you look at the Waikato District Council, the big makeup of our community is obviously farmers, and so there is, I guess from my perspective, there's certainly the push to kind of drive, I guess, some changes around and understanding best practice models, and like I said earlier, and you said earlier, that we've got pockets of organisations or farms actually even in both Waikato and New Zealand that are doing some really innovative stuff.
Yes.
I.e. organic farming, and so really kind of, how can we kind of educate some of our local farmers to adopt some of these practices, because I know some of their experience has been like, they constantly be pointed the finger, taxes, they've been taxed left, right and centre. This is some of the discussions that are coming out of just conversations that I've had with my ward anyway. And so at what point does it stop? And unfortunately, when you're dealing with things such as climate stage, it needs to stop where it needs to stop. And at this stage, we still got to keep going, because there are a lot of things that that need to change. And for the greater part of the farming community, to be honest, certainly from my knowledge, is that everyone is really trying.
The vast majority are, and we're not really here to talk about a carbon tax and stuff, but that kind of incentivises the people who are trying.
That's right.
They get further incentivised. So I don't have any constituents that are farmers, but I grew up on a farm, went to Koorero.
Right.
My dad's side of the family are farmers, so I have a few ears and a few voices in my ear in that community. But it is a good thing to balance, because Hamiltonians, it's been a big part of our history, and while I don't represent those people right now, it's still an important part of the whole economy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So another part of the agriculture, a way to reduce emissions is to reduce waste. And so that is from individual basis within households, but also within industries. And so there's great organisations like Koorero who are actually distributing all the agriculture that we're producing to everyone, rather than throwing a lot out, because that's a huge part. Food in our fridge, if you're throwing out an old steak, or if you're throwing out old food and not composting it, all these things, it's the throwing away and how you're throwing it away that actually makes a really significant difference to carbon emissions.
Yeah, and so I went along to the Waikato AGM last night, and had the chance of meeting Jo.
Oh, nice.
From Koorero. So managed to have a really good Koorero and discussion with her, and they're doing some really great mahi in and around the Waikato. From my conversations last night, there seems to be a need to push their initiatives and programs to the wider Waikato, which is really exciting to hear. But it is really like when you see organisations like that who are really trying to change the game up, and implement some really, some of it actually is, to be honest, most of it is quite practical stuff. It's just that we live now in a society where everything has to be instant, and people forget about just the simple stuff. And then you've got places like Annie's Corner, who Koorero work through, which is so cool. So they're not, some might call these things your little social enterprises, but some of them, like Annie's Corner, are just like community members who have just opened up their garages and are choosing to kind of do their pitching and do their little bits.
Absolutely.
Which is cool.
So obviously both of us represent different groups. You obviously support Māori and I support disabled people, and both of them are hugely overrepresented in statistics around poverty, social mobility and mental health statistics.
Yeah.
The social mobility is probably one of the most important ones, and that's talks about how easy it is to go from being in a low socioeconomic group to a higher socioeconomic group, and just there's so many negative feedback loops that stop people from being able to get on that higher rung of society.
Yeah, that's right.
Just not having access to education, healthcare, mental health services, infrastructure, not having a car, or all those things just make it so much harder to then get further up. So do you want to just say a little bit about how if you're an elected member of council, how you'll try and improve that for Māori?
Yeah, well, I think,
or for all marginalised groups.
Well, that's right. I think the bottom line for us is that we're obviously supportive of everyone, but in our communities. But the thing is that we can speak from a lived experience perspective, and means of me being Māori one, and actually us being young. Like I think we can probably speak from that as well. So look, when you look at our communities, it normally is that they are quite disengaged with anything, both from kind of general elections to local elections, and part of that has come out as a result of them feeling like their voices aren't being heard. No one takes them seriously.
They can't see themselves in that role.
Well, that's right. And so what has come out as a result of this is me choosing to stand for council, and we certainly saw that over the weekend when we had the launch of my campaign, where we had a lot of my community anyway really come out and force, just simply because someone from our community decided to stand. And so
and then there's an opportunity for them to learn about how the process affects them and what they can do.
Well, I think that's one of the benefits that have come out of it, is because they see somebody who looks like them, who is them, who comes from them, where they feel like now that they can engage and that they can connect, and it has become the catalyst for them to really try and self-motivate or self-educate around why it's important for them to vote.
And for me as well, like I've noticed, even though I'm just one disabled person and I have my own lived experience, and that is super important. That is unspeakably important to bring that perspective to council. At the same time, I'm just one disabled person, and there's lots of other lived experiences as well. But what's really great is that it gives that whole community a bridge into council. Because you're part of that community, you have your ear open to those community members, when otherwise there might be so last night I went to a meeting for Disabled Persons Assembly. And that was there were council members answering questions about how the new free bus for disabled people would be enacted. And that was a great exercise, and the council members answering questions were really awesome. But that's kind of a special event. That's like a special occasion for disabled people to have that forum. And
that's right.
And unless disabled people are less likely to be able to go to every event, and sometimes you just might not be feeling well, or you don't have access to that public transport already. So it's like, how do you get to that meeting to then talk about public transport? So it's really good just to have more people in the community who, one, have lived that experience, but are then also just closer to being able to hear that feedback from the rest of the community on an ongoing basis. Yeah,
that's right. And some of my experiences too, as a result of me choosing to stand, and yes, largely a lot of it is because I feel like our unique Māori voice is somewhat underrepresented in local government and also in ours. The exciting part about it though is that we have people like Lisa Thompson who stands in the Raglan ward, who's really been kind of a key driver and has used that platform to really give us a voice. But it's important that we have some other champions that are supporting alongside her and in there with her. But yes, some of the experiences, some of the conversations that have come out of it has been that we don't, we've not, other than Lisa, we don't actively see, or they haven't actively seen anyone in local government, in particular councillors, really get involved in the in Māori community events. And look, to be honest, when we look at Waikato, or in the Waikato region, under the maru of Kingitanga, there are so many events, and it's quite noticeable when you have tons of events, and we don't have any representation from council that come along to that and make themselves known. And the benefit of me standing is this is my community, and I very much want to be able to use that as a platform to give them a voice.
So I guess we'll just wrap up by talking about our key messages and policies that we really want to get across.
Yeah. Well, look, I shared mine earlier. So mine is really around kind of bringing our communities in so that they can be more engaged in local government planning. And so, yeah, look, our community, actually, you probably could agree that majority of most of them, but definitely mine, have felt quite disengaged somewhat, and there are, let's be honest, there are pockets of it that is working, but the greater part of it probably does need some work, and so that's definitely one of the key things that I wanna advocate for. The other key ones for me, and it's probably come as a result of my experience working in the public sector, particularly in the employment space, is I really want to advocate to support infrastructure growth and really leverage employment and business opportunities as a result of that. So that's all around social procurement, and how can we create opportunities for the wider region too.
That's improving the equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome, but giving everyone that platform to grow from is a huge part of improving that opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so my main messages I haven't actually spoken about too much today. Is mainly around disruptive technologies and using my background in technology and science to try and start thinking about these things before they cause a big issue for the community. And so for instance with e-scooters, obviously this is a poignant topic at the moment, and a lot of the councillors are kind of in a let's wait and see type mindset. But I think it's kind of obvious if you look at other cities what will happen if you're not prepared. And I know from the disabled community there's a lot of worry there about just letting these things loose, going 30k an hour around the city streets.
That's right.
And so yeah, I really think there needs to be separate spaces for bikes and e-scooters, which also helps my vision around reducing congestion and carbon emissions, and really supporting green technologies. And so you can do that by showing leadership in council around transitioning to solar panels, which are just a fiscally responsible thing to do, in my opinion, if you're looking beyond 3 years and they pay themselves back in 7 years and have these great returns over the lifetime. And then also having more charging stations for electric vehicles, electric scooters, electric bikes and electric wheelchairs. And then also, this ties in with my vision around Hamilton being more accessible, being easier to get around for the ageing population, and also transitioning to green technologies and reducing disruptive. One last one I'll just quickly say is the worry around drone deliveries, and if we have Amazon, Domino's and Uber, if all their planes come to fruition within the next few years. There's going to be, hundreds of drones whizzing around above our city, and the current regulations.
Well, they're not done. I mean, there is none, or if any, but and there certainly hasn't been enough due diligence done in that space around.
No, in Hamilton, you're allowed to go on above the streets, but not above public property.
Yeah.
So they'd be doing all these weird manoeuvres and stuff. So there probably needs to be like lanes in the sky that they're allowed to go down, and delivery hubs away from the city, and regulations around reducing high definition cameras and facial recognition software, because this could be quite a dystopian thing in the next 5 years.
Well, that's right.
If there's some bad actors.
What is exciting though is that I heard the Labour government at the moment has been doing some stuff in that space of recent, so it's actually quite good to see central government kind of really pushing for that.
Really encourage local governments to then see how that's exactly going to work in their city.
That's right.
It's good that they're thinking about that, but we all the local governments also need to create regulations, and that's not about discouraging these technologies. It actually encourages them, because a lot of reason that these companies don't go to certain cities is because there's uncertainty around what will happen to them. So if you create these obvious lanes for them, it actually encourages industry in those areas.
Yeah, that's right. Cool.
Yeah, so it's so good to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, got lots in common, and hopefully we can work together and both be elected officials.
Oh yeah. Look, that will be the ideal. But I think if anything, what we can take away from this, even just us putting our hand up to stand for council, is, I mean, we can walk away knowing in some way or form we've managed, one, to be a voice for the communities in which we represent, and that two, that we've really kind of, if anything, are really pushing for change, have been able to push and drive change, and certainly shake up the status quo and create some disruption, what have you.
Because even as a candidate, you have this extra platform where you have the ear of all the current councillors, the mayor, and the other council candidates, and so that's going to be where the next elected officials come from. So having this platform to share our ideas with other candidates, we should have significant impact regardless. Yeah,
and this here I think is quite unique too, in a way where candidates are actually coming together. Be that we're sitting in different councils, but I think it's I think this certainly shows the sense of
willingness to collaborate,
which is really, really cool to see. And even though that means you're collabing in this space, we've certainly already had conversations with other candidates who are standing in similar or different wards and districts. So for me, I think that even just that itself it really shows the sense of leadership, but definitely shows that that we know that this is a joint effort, and that we understand that we have to agree that there has to be some point of common agenda where we have to come together and make it work.
Awesome.
Cool.
Alright, cheers mate.
Alright, cheers.
See ya.
Cool.